Last year he did long distance running.
Where do y'all live?
In Midland? Yes.
It's our resident recruiter.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I like it though.
Oh, okay, yeah, this lesson is good. Very good. Boom.
How are you doing today?
Good.
See you. Morning, Gary.
Morning, everybody.
Doing good.
Never better. Isn't that?
I'm having trouble saying it.
Say never better. Yeah, like really?
Something
We've
about
had a
the
lot
kids
of really
being
cool
born.
moments.
It only grows and blossoms and
You gotta be like this good friend of mine. Every time
Got
you
your
say
boots
how
on?
you do, he says, best day of
Because
my
we're,
life.
next sections we're going to be walking.
Best day of my life.
Oh,
I don't know if I need a microphone for
Best day of my life.
I don't know if I'm loud enough.
You're loud.
Am I loud enough? Okay.
they are cute.
All right, we're.
Boots.
I don't
Yes,
know.
your boots.
They're pretty
That's
down. Like it?
Good morning. We're glad you are here this morning. We are so lucky to have, and I'm lucky to announce, we have a guest speaker this morning. His name is Scott Lynch, and his wife Brittany, and his son Blake, and their daughter Ava. And they're from Midland, from One Hope Church of Christ. So we're so glad they're here this morning. And Scott, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good morning. So I'm going to ask you to turn over to the book of Daniel with me. That's where we're going to start our lesson this morning. And I'm generally pretty interactive when it comes to the class time, so I'm going to ask questions and ask for some interaction. So the lesson I kind of want to go over this morning is over an identity crisis. And I feel like we seem to have an identity crisis in the country that we're living in today, but it's nothing new. It's happened before in the Bible, and I believe the Bible kind of has and gone over anything that we can deal with today. There's nothing new under the sun. So we're going to go to the book of Daniel real quick, and I'm going to read from chapter 1, the first few verses. It says, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave the king of Judah into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God," and that's lowercase g, "and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God," lowercase g. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of the officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and of the nobles, youths in whom had no defect. They were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had the ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him, to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, and at the end of which they were to enter into the king's personal service. Now among them, from the sons of Judah, were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, I probably pronounced that wrong, to be honest, and then Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. And to Daniel he assigned the name, this one's always been tough for me.
That B word.
Yeah. The B word. Belteshazzar. I'm going to give it a shot. Say it again.
Both the Shadrach.
There you go. That's good. And then to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. And so we probably remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because they're famous for a story in the Bible. But I just want to go into some of the background. And in Babylon, when they conquered anyone and they changed their names, they did this for a very specific purpose. And that purpose was to bring shame to those that they were renaming, to show that they had ownership over them. And so in the Hebrew name, Daniel, it means God is my judge. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce it again. The name they gave him was Lady Protect the King. So he went from a very masculine name to a feminine name that meant something completely different. It had a focus on God from Daniel to a focus on man with the name that they gave him. So Hananiah means in the Hebrew, Yahweh has been gracious. And Shadrach means I am fearful of God. So in the Hebrew, it went from talking about God, and God is to be feared, God is gracious, focus on God, to focus on self, being fearful of, the focus was on the self of being fearful of God. Mishael in the Hebrew was who can compare to my God? No one. And then he went to Meshach, and it means I am despised, contemptible, and humiliated. So he came from a name of confidence, a name talking about God, to a name of almost cowardice. And then Azariah means Yahweh has helped, or God has helped. And then the Babylonian name, Abednego, the servant of Nebu. I think that's pronounced, or Nebo. So he went from a focus on being a son of God to the focus of being a servant or a slave of man. And so, as we look at this, in the Hebrew and in the Old Testament, there's a huge focus on names. And there was a lot of times where somebody's name was changed on purpose to give them a new identity, because they took a lot of their identity from these names. Can anybody name anybody that had their name changed in the Old Testament or the New that you can remember?
Saul to Paul.
Saul to Paul.
Jacob to Israel.
Jacob to Israel.
Abram, Abraham, and Sarai, Sarah.
Yep. And what was the purpose of the name changes?
Usually an event happened that changed the course of their lives somehow.
Yeah, it was a change in the course of their lives, and sometimes it was a change in their actual identity. The name, because the names actually meant something. They were named specifically for a specific reason, for an identity. So here, the Babylonians changed their names to try to change their identity. Can you imagine if we were conquered by a foreign government and they had us all change our names to something that meant that we were slaves of man versus a name that we were given that had glory to God? That's kind of what's happening here. They're coming from Judah. They have names that really focus on their identity in God, and they're being renamed to be ashamed and to be focused on men and kings. And so I go into this story a little bit because this kind of shows a crisis in identity where if you had the name Daniel, God is my judge, and you had your name changed to mean Lady, protect the king, if you came from a culture that put a lot of emphasis on the name that you were given, and that was part of your identity, and you grew up with an identity of the name Daniel, God is my judge. You're always looking to God. God is my judge. And then it says here in the book of Daniel that God allowed them to be captive by Babylonians, and they changed his name to Lady, protect the king. Do you think that that might have an impact on how you view yourself?
Possibly.
Quite possibly. I mean, I've had my name for over 41 years, and if somebody just decided to change it, it would quite possibly affect my identity and how I viewed myself.
It works the same way as if you're constantly called lazy or stupid or
Yes.
whatever. You believe those things, and then you believe your name. It's constantly called that.
You must have read the lesson. So, today, if we put a huge emphasis on our names, and if our names have meaning that are giving glory to God like they are back here, and they do, and it comes down to the words that we use and the words that we associate ourselves with, we have an identity crisis here in America. When America started, it was started under the impression that there was one God and he gave us certain rights. But America is not our identity. We don't come from America. America is not our home. This is where we reside temporarily. But if we really believe that we are Christians and that we were here and we are only here for a brief moment to serve God and then go home, then our identity should be in God at all times. And so the words that we use when we associate ourselves or other people are giving them an identity. And it's very, very easy to say, well, this person is lazy, and that is an identity. Because not everybody today, I'll admit that there are some of my children, I did not name them for a specific reason. And there is one that I named for a specific reason. So, for example, our youngest, our little girl, we decided to hit the reset button because my son, he's the youngest here, he's 15 years old. And he has an older brother who is 16, about to be 17. So we hit the reset button trying for a little girl, and we prayed for a little girl, and we were blessed with a little girl. But along the way, we had heartache. We had a couple of miscarriages that we had to deal with. So when she came along, we were very, very purposeful in her name. And her name is Ava, and it means life. And that life was blessed to us by God. And so sometimes a name has a very, very deep meaning, and sometimes a name is a family name. Sometimes a name is just a name that you like when you name your kids. My dad named me. He didn't have a very specific purpose. He named me Scott. He liked the name. But when you look up the meaning of Scott, it's of the Scots. I mean, there's not a lot of meaning behind that name, but it doesn't matter. We need to decide where we want to place our identity. Is it going to be in the name that we are called, in the name that we are given? Or where do you grab your identity?
You know, I think we all appreciate our family name and try to, have respect for that. And I know that's one thing that's always affected me somewhat, is about wanting to behave in a manner maybe acceptable to not bring shame on the family name. And so we do have respect for that. And I think that I don't know what my first name means. I was named after my dad, and I passed that name on to one of my sons.
Yeah.
Not the full name, but at least part of the name. And so we do, put importance in those, and I guess they affect us at least somewhat in our actions and behavior because of, maybe wanting to be protected for that name. And I certainly feel the same way about being called a Christian, of wanting to behave in a manner that would be maybe obvious to people. And I've always had in my mind, the things that are important, God, family, and country. And I am, I guess, proud to be an American. I mean, I'm having my struggles in late times with some of that because of the way things have been going, but I do think it's important. One of our, when we look at a modern situation about how names could be, we look at the old Johnny Cash song, a boy named Sue, and what that did to the boy who was named Sue. And so names are important. They do mean a lot to us.
Yeah, I agree. Names can be very important. When I grew up, my dad said, I'm not going to give you a lot, but I gave you a last name. And you better bring that name back better than I gave it to you. And if I didn't, I definitely got in trouble. And so names have a lot, but the best name and the best identity that we have taken on, like you said, is the name Christian. Christ follower, a disciple of Christ. And it's a very different thing if we place our identity in the art rather than the artist. And what I mean to say is, if we view ourselves as the art, the creation of the artist, God, you can place a lot of pride and identity into oneself, into the art. And it's a very different shift when we value the art over the artist versus if we value the artist over the art. And when you value the artist, God, because He created us, He designed us, and He knew us even in the womb. So how do we make it apparent that we are Christians? What values do we have that make that very apparent?
Scott, using the illustration of an artist, everybody knows of Picasso, right? Because it has a particular style to that art. It is set out by itself, right? And so we know the artist based on a whole handful of his art. Same goes with many of them, right?
Yep.
And so, I like your illustration there that the focus between the art versus the artist tells a lot. When you look at what a lot of people, who's your idol, right? It's a celebrity, a football player, a basketball player, right? Michael Jordan. We know Michael Jordan as a reputation of top athlete, right?
Yep.
Same with Tiger Woods and a handful of others. And they become defined or the definition of a thing, right? Their name sets an image of a whole picture. And so for us, when we answer, well, what do you do? Tell me about yourself. Well, I'm an oil worker. I'm this and that. Tells you what you prioritize in your life. The first answer is really what we prioritize in life. Whether our work, whether our hobbies, things like that. So, how far down the list is Christian when we start talking?
Yeah, that's a good point. And the question, and it's not to say that there's anything wrong with when somebody says, what do you do? And you answer with your job. There's nothing wrong with that. But like you said, how far down is the word Christian? I don't know. Sometimes it's pretty far down the list before I get to talking about it for myself. It's not something I'm proud of, but it happens. I get busy with life and I focus on the art rather than the artist. So, what's one of the ways that we can constantly show this current culture that has some misplaced identities a way that they can reclaim their true identity.
What's some of the ways that we can?
Yeah.
Turn off your phone and social media and stop watching the news.
Yeah. That's a great way for you internally to align yourself. But what's something that you can do for others? What's something that you can do to constantly show others?
Take their phone and turn it off.
Take their phone and turn it off.
Go down and do likewise.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
one of the things I think of is, we let our light shine when we show fruit of our spirit. And so when we do that, that's, reflecting our Father. And so show Him in our lives.
absolutely. But that's a lot harder said than done. There are some people that I just get rubbed the wrong way with. And that is really hard for me to show them grace and mercy. But I'm allowing myself to get in the way. So I want to turn to a story that I think shows a lot about how we can act. If you'll turn with me to John chapter 8. We're going to start with verse 1. It says, "But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives early in the morning. He came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him. And he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery, in the very act. Now in the law of Moses commanded us to stone such a woman. What then do you say?' And they were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down, with his finger wrote on the ground. But then they persisted in asking him. He straightened up and said to them, 'He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her.' And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And when they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones. And he was left alone, and the woman, where she was, in the center of the court. Straightening up, Jesus said to her, 'Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you?' She said, 'No one, Lord.' And Jesus said, 'I do not condemn you either. Go, from now on, sin no more.'" And I really like this story because it shows a response that really is just so unique, and it's one that is uniquely God, uniquely Christ. But what did he give her in this moment? We're talking about fruits of the Spirit.
Well, love.
Love.
His concerns for her over everything.
Yeah, it was a very, very public display of something that she had done wrong. And they're telling her right in front of her, "Well, we're about to stone her. What do you say?" And he showed love in his response, but he also showed grace. But he also showed truth. With the grace that he gave her truth. Go and sin no more. It wasn't just grace for her sin. It was also the truth. And I think that combination is very, very important because grace without truth can be meaningless.
I think and he didn't deny the fact that of the sin that she's caught in.
Right.
He didn't push it to the side and say, well, we're not going to worry about that. But I think so many times today we look at the sin and focus on that and start on an accusatory side and say, well, what you've done is wrong, and we got to address this more than just loving and going forward and saying, okay, let's get past that.
It's very easy for us to take more of the stance of the Pharisees and Sadducees and say, look, this is the sin. You're doing wrong. You need to stop right now. Here's the punishment. And then it's also easy for us to show grace and say, you know what, everybody makes mistakes. It's not a big deal. But where Jesus finds himself in that answer is a combination of the two. He didn't deny her sin. He didn't tell her it was okay. He showed grace and then told her the truth. It's time to go and sin no more. Because sometimes truth without grace, it's mean. I've been, victim is a bad word, but I've been on the receiving side of truth without grace. I've been on the delivering side because I have sons of truth without grace. And I've also been on the delivering side because I have sons of grace without truth. And it's hard to have both at all times, but it's something that we strive for. And I think that Jesus shows us a really good example of how we can successfully combine both. And successfully combine both to start reclaiming our identity as Christians. I just forgot what I was going to say, but it had to do with an old adage. And somebody will know it. A wise man once was giving me some advice, and I just can't remember the advice, but it had to do with marriage. Oh, he said, you can be right or you can be married. I was like, really? And that kind of shows that, well, how are you being right? Are you doing it with just truth? Or are you doing it with grace? Because you can be right and be graceful and show a pure example of what Jesus did here.
Is that advice just for the man? I'm caught up on that.
You know, I don't know if it was just for the man, but you know, I'm sure it was very, very pointed at me as a young man because of who I was.
I've only ever heard men say it.
And that may be possible, but
So Scott, there's an adage I've heard since I was probably 10 years old, and that is, it's not what you said, it's how you said it.
Yep.
Right? I've heard that my entire life, probably on a more than weekly basis, right? And I think that's exactly what you're saying. That's hitting for me with grace and truth is, I'm usually right in what I'm saying, but how I say it has no grace whatsoever. It is as blunt as you can be, sometimes innocently and sometimes very purposely. And you know, I've drained more relationships and lost more opportunities because of the lack of grace than I have the amount of truth, right? Both in my Christian walk, in my 15 years of ministry, in work, in family, all the way around. And so, you know, you can't ignore it. You do have to correct it, like Jesus does, sin no more, but it can't be the only thing that you're focused on either, right? And I teach my kids, I teach my employees all the time, when you come to me with a problem, I want to know at least 2 or 3 solutions that you've come up with so far, and we'll talk through them, right? Because if you're not thinking on ways to fix your problems, you're going to be stuck in a miry pit for a long time. And so it's not always that, well, I know what the answers are, so I'm going to go fix it myself. It's a change of mindset from just staying focused on the problem or the sin that we're trying to correct and browbeating people with it, but it's a mindset of conversation. Okay, yes, that's the reality. Yes, that happened. But let's talk about how to move past that. Let's talk about how God is forgiving. Let's talk about how we get that forgiveness. Let's talk about, those avenues that keep us from returning to that. And so that's where, grace and truth have to walk hand in hand in a balance. Jesus would tell the woman at the well, there's a time coming where you're going to worship in spirit and in truth, right? And that's both the emotional side of our Christianity along with the doctrinal side. And that "and" word, we're very doctrinal about the "and" in Acts 2:38, right? Everybody preaches the "and" in Acts 2:38 is important. But look at how many other things are connected by the same word. And we don't put the same emphasis on the equality of those.
Yeah, and is just a mathematical problem. And means in addition to, on top of. 2 + 2 = 4. Grace, truth, and word. Without one of them, you don't have the same solution. 100%. And I didn't prepare the verse, but over in Psalms, and I'm sure somebody can find it, and I said Psalms, over in Proverbs, I believe there's a verse that refers to a kind word turns away wrath. And that's very, very true. When is the last time that you were approached with the finger wagging, telling you exactly what you did wrong, and what was your reaction? I guarantee you my internal reaction, maybe not external, my internal is immediately going to be shutting off, not listening to another thing you say, and I'm just ready to get out of there. It does not bring up the same reaction as if somebody were to come alongside you and say, hey, look, I know you messed up, I've done the same thing, but it's time to stop making the same mistake, and here's how you can do it. Because here's what God says about living well. And I know you're a Christian and I'm a Christian, but let me know if you need any help with that. And maybe those aren't the right words. Maybe you know that person better and there's better words for that. But there is a complete difference in the way that you've been approached. Who here has been approached with the first one? The wagging finger and you've done something wrong and you better stop right now. And unless you were 5 years old and being approached by your mother or your father with threat of punishment, who here immediately changed what they were doing in their adult life? It doesn't elicit the same response as having that grace along with it. And we're called to be disciples of Christ and to learn from Him. And that I felt was one of the best stories in how He combined the two. And you brought up another one, the woman at the well. I don't know if anybody's ever watched the TV show called The Chosen, but I'm a very, very visual person. Ever since I was a little kid, movies were where it was at for me. And man, I grew up watching John Wayne until I figured out that there was actual color movies going on outside of my house. John Wayne was where it was at. But in the TV show The Chosen, it shows and it depicts their version of what might have happened. And it was just so amazing to watch a depiction that may be fiction, but he literally diverted from his trail to go wait for this woman who was going to show up late because she was ashamed to show up with the other women. And then he tells her the truth about her life and then shows her grace. It's just another great example. I think that's pretty much all I've prepared this morning. Does anybody have any other comments?
Just a little bit on that. To me, the whole Chosen it brings to, like you said, visual. So I can see it more. I mean, I've read it and I read it, but seeing it and seeing the interaction of the disciples really brings it more alive, because it's like you see how they respond, and then in my mind I realized these were you know, a lot of them were just grown-up kids and their struggles that they had. But then, speaking of the woman at the well there, she, just that realization that he took time out of his journey, going from one place to the other, and said, okay, we're gonna make a pit stop over here, just so that he could redeem her
Yeah.
and that whole town.
Yeah, he's the Son of God.
Wow.
And he took time individually to go speak to a single woman who probably felt more shame than most women in her community, to let her know she was not beyond saving. And he takes that same time in our lives. Yeah, it blows my mind. And you're right, I'm a very visual person, so reading the Bible, I had always just read about the apostles, and oh man, they were chosen because they were great. Oh yeah, they were fishermen, but they were great. And then being able to watch just somebody's depiction of what might have happened really brought it to be a little bit more real for me. Like they're not perfect. They make mistakes too. And whether the whole depiction is fact or fiction, that I never get into. I understand it's Hollywood. I understand it's a version of what could have happened. I understand that this is the truth and the only truth that we need to turn to. But it's still, for me, being more visual, it really hit home for me.
Scott, I want to circle back to how you started with the identity crisis, right? And how a lot of Christians do struggle to present the identity of being a Christian. Through the lesson, I've been thinking through the different folks in the Bible that we've covered, and when I think about the visual aspects, you know, that the two of you are talking about watching the Chosen show, we've had a number of men come to fill in preaching and teaching for us here, and they have been on different missionary trips down in South America and different places, some that work with the children's homes and the camps, and you see, because of the visual reference they have, they see Christianity play out very different than a lot of Christians ever will, because they go see these folks, and it's very similar to some of the Bible stories, and they have this visual of folks that just embrace God in a totally different way, without any judgment, without any want, without any need. They embrace God. And you see that with kids when they go to the Christian camp during summer. You see a change in their attitude when they come home and they're more excited. And they will identify more as Christians because they've seen God play out right before their eyes, right? And so that it's a very important trait for us to look to. Our faith is not just in this book. Our faith is in where we go and who we talk to and how we interact with people. And it's that tangible, right? We talked about that first off, is we attach to it, we learn from it. When we do it, we can read it and learn it and understand it, but when we do it solidifies, it's tangible. And that's that visual learning. You know, there's a lot of studies that show if you hear it, you're going to retain a particular percentage.
Mm-hmm.
If you hear it and see it, you're going to retain a better percentage. If you hear it and see it and you feel it, you'll retain almost all of it and only lose a very small piece of it. And that's true for our faith. How much do we read in comparison to how much we just listen to the preachers? How much do we read versus hearing versus doing? Right? And that's where our faith, our identity will get stronger the more that we practice all three.
I might take a step further and say that I believe you will strengthen your identity if you understand it's not just faith, but take the next step and trust. But that's all I had. I appreciate it.
What is your plan for how long
How are you? Good. I'm doing good.